Mr. President, members of the Senate, I rise to oppose this bill. I'd like to explain why. Mr. President, this bill treads on thin ice on some very important principles of this country. It treads on thin ice in confusing the right of a person to hold their own religious and moral views, which is sacred, and the practice of imposing those religious and moral views on another who does not agree. That is also sacred. Mr. President, what this bill would do would be to allow an adoption agency based solely on its own religious and moral views to use state dollars to deny adoption by people who have maybe a different moral or religious view. Mr. President, back about 130 years ago or so, in the 1880s, I believe it was, the United States Supreme Court considered a case from Utah involving polygamy. Now, we know when the Mormons first settled Utah, they did believe in the practice of polygamy. They don't now, and there are laws in Utah against polygamy. But a case went to the U.S. Supreme Court concerning the practice of polygamy, which was outlawed, and the defense to the practice of polygamy was a religious and moral view, a conscience clause, so to speak, that the defendants said they were entitled to practice polygamy because of their religious or moral views. And the United States Supreme Court said, yes, you can hold those views. They can be your religious views. They can be your moral views. They can be your belief system. But you can't practice polygamy. They made a clear distinction between belief systems and practices. And this would make it so an adoption agency, using its own belief systems, could carry out a practice which invidiously discriminates against other people. That's why it treads on thin ice. Mr. President, the great Virginian Thomas Jefferson put on his tombstone one of the three things he was most proud of, and that is the statute for religious freedom in Virginia, passed in 1785 by his friends James Madison and others when he was the U.S. ambassador to Paris at the time. And he had been working on it for 9 years. And the origins of the statute for religious freedom go back to 1776, right after the Declaration of Independence. And it was the Presbyterians from Hanover, Mr. President, who insisted that such a statute pass. The Presbyterians did not want their tax dollars going to the Church of England. The Presbyterians did not want a faith-based test on whether they could participate in government as a magistrate, a judge, or whatever. They were opposed to faith-based tests. They were opposed to using tax dollars in a way they disagreed with. And that goes way back to the Puritans who came to Massachusetts in 1620. They left an intolerant England to come and form the kingdom of God as they saw it on earth in Massachusetts. And we've evolved since then, and Jefferson's statute of religious freedom makes it clear that you have the right to practice to exercise your religion as you see fit, but you do not have the right to impose your views on another using state dollars. And this is why this bill treads on thin ice. This is not about the right of conscience. Everybody has the right of conscience. That is sacred, as I said. But it's the right of imposing your conscience views on another. And that's why it treads on thin ice. And I would hope, Mr. President, before we engage in a bill like this, we consider the consequences that maybe we haven't all thought of. I'm not on the committee that dealt with this bill, and I didn't start seeing the bill until it came to the floor. But the more I looked at it, the more I saw the potential of treading on thin ice. So I'd hope, Mr. President, before we vote on this, we would consider the implications to the fundamental tenets of this country, not to impose our views on others when conscience of another is being affected as well. Thank you, Mr. President. I hope we would vote against this bill.
Thank you, Senator.